In The Shining, Jack Torrance is presented not simply as a villain who descends into madness, but as a character whose collapse exposes the fragile intersection of ego, repression, addiction, masculinity, and environment. Jack's deterioration is gradual and unsettling because it never arrives as a sudden break from normality. Instead, it feels like the amplification of traits that were already present. Kubrick's film resists easy explanations for Jack's behavior, offering psychological, supernatural, and social interpretations that overlap and contradict one another. Jack Torrance becomes less a single person and more a lens through which the film explores how authority, entitlement, and unresolved trauma can metastasize when given isolation and permission. From his earliest scenes, Jack is marked by insecurity disguised as confidence. He introduces himself as a writer and former teacher, but both identities are unstable. His teaching career has ended under troubling circumstances, and his writing has produced little beyond aspiration. What defines Jack most clearly is not success, but resentment. Resentment toward a world that has not rewarded him, toward a family that depends on him, and toward himself for failing to live up to his own expectations. Kubrick frames Jack as a man clinging to the idea of authority rather than embodying it, someone who believes he deserves respect without being able to earn it through care or responsibility. This fragility is crucial because it means Jack enters the Overlook Hotel already fractured. His alcoholism, though discussed calmly, signals a history of lost control and buried guilt. Jack speaks of his past violence as something finished and contained, yet the film repeatedly suggests that this belief is an illusion. He wants the Overlook not only for solitude but for validation, a space where he can finally be important. The caretaker role appeals to Jack because it offers power without scrutiny and isolation without accountability. The Overlook does not simply drive Jack mad, it magnifies what he brings with him. Kubrick emphasizes symmetry, repetition, and vast empty spaces to suggest that the hotel reflects Jack's internal state. As Wendy and Danny attempt to adapt to the environment, Jack increasingly merges with it. His creative block is not just a failure of writing, but a confrontation with emptiness. Faced with silence and space, Jack cannot produce meaning, only repetition, which mirrors his inability to change as a person. The hotel's ghosts function less as external monsters and more as embodiments of Jack's desires. They flatter him, reassure him of his importance, and absolve him of responsibility. The bartender and former caretaker speak to Jack in the language he wants to hear, framing violence as duty and cruelty as necessity. Whether these figures are supernatural or psychological is ultimately less important than what they represent. A system that tells Jack he is right to be angry, right to dominate, and right to punish those who challenge him. Masculinity, control, and the family dynamic. Jack's relationship with Wendy and Danny reveals how deeply his sense of self is tied to control. He interprets Wendy's concern as interference and Danny's vulnerability as weakness. Rather than seeing his family as people, Jack increasingly sees them as obstacles to his purpose. Kubrick underscores this through blocking and dialogue, often placing Jack physically above Wendy or framing her as small and overwhelmed, reinforcing the power imbalance that Jack both depends on and resents. Jack's masculinity is portrayed as brittle and performative. He equates authority with intimidation and mistakes obedience for love. When his family does not conform to his expectations, he interprets their fear as betrayal. This mindset allows him to rewrite his own violence as justified discipline, a transformation that is chilling precisely because it is rooted in ordinary patterns of entitlement rather than sudden insanity. Jack does not believe he is becoming a monster. He believes he is finally asserting himself. One of the film's most unsettling aspects is its refusal to fully absolve Jack of responsibility. While the Overlook exerts influence, Jack consistently chooses to align himself with it. He listens eagerly, accepts its logic, and acts on its suggestions without significant resistance. Kubrick avoids portraying Jack as confused or conflicted in his final transformation. Instead, he becomes clearer, more focused, and disturbingly confident. This clarity suggests that what looks like madness may also be a release from restraint, an abandonment of empathy rather than a loss of reason. The ambiguity forces the viewer to confront uncomfortable questions. If Jack is possessed, then he is a victim. If he is not, then the horror lies in how easily he embraces cruelty when given justification. The film deliberately sustains both readings, implying that systems of power often operate this way. They offer people permission to become their worst selves while telling them they are fulfilling a higher purpose. The closing image of Jack in the hotel's photograph suggests that he was always part of the Overlook, or that the Overlook exists to absorb men like him. This ending reframes Jack's journey not as a unique tragedy, but as a recurring pattern. The hotel feeds on unresolved violence and entitlement, preserving them as tradition. Jack's individuality dissolves, leaving only his role. He is no longer a failed writer or frustrated father. He is a caretaker in the most disturbing sense, maintaining a legacy of harm. This final transformation strips Jack of complexity even as it confirms it. He sought permanence, recognition, and importance, and he achieves them only by surrendering his humanity. The Overlook grants him exactly what he wants, but at the cost of everything that could have redeemed him. The final image of The Shining, the slow zoom into the black and white photograph dated July 4th, 1921, revealing Jack Torrance smiling at the center of a ballroom crowd, is one of the most discussed and unsettling endings in film history because it destabilizes everything the viewer thinks they understand about time, identity, and causality. Up to this point, the film has allowed multiple interpretations of Jack's descent. But the photograph reframes the entire narrative retroactively. It suggests that Jack does not merely die in the hedge maze. He is absorbed into the Overlook's past, as though he has always belonged there. Time in the film ceases to function as a straight line, and instead becomes cyclical, looping back on itself in a way that mirrors the hotel's repeating patterns and corridors. The image implies that Jack's story is not an origin but a recurrence. This collapse of linear time aligns with Kubrick's broader visual language throughout the film. Hallways repeat, conversations echo earlier ones, and characters seem to slide into roles already written for them. The photograph does not feel like a twist added for shock value. It feels like the final confirmation of a structure that has been quietly in place all along. The Overlook is not simply haunted by ghosts, it is haunted by time itself. And Jack's presence in the photograph suggests that the hotel does not distinguish between past and present occupants. Everyone who belongs to it is folded into the same eternal moment. The reincarnation theory proposes that Jack Torrance is not just metaphorically connected to the Overlook, but literally a reincarnation of a previous caretaker or guest who participated in the hotel's cycle of violence. This reading is supported by Grady's chilling line, "You have always been the caretaker," which directly contradicts Jack's understanding of his own history. Rather than presenting this as a lie or manipulation, the film allows the statement to linger without correction, giving it a strange weight. If Jack has always been the caretaker, then his arrival at the Overlook is not the beginning of a transformation, but the continuation of one. Under this interpretation, Jack's immediate comfort in the hotel and his rapid alignment with its values are not coincidences, but remnants of a past life resurfacing. The Overlook does not need to convince Jack to become violent. It only needs to remind him of who he already was. His writer's block, his alcoholism, and his resentment take on a new dimension here, functioning almost like symptoms of a soul that cannot fully adapt to a new era. Jack feels out of place in modern society because, at some level, he belongs to another time, one in which hierarchy, domination, and rigid authority were more openly accepted. Identity as role rather than self. If Jack is reincarnated, then identity in The Shining is not personal but functional. People are not individuals so much as roles that recur across generations. The caretaker is not Jack Torrance the man. It is a position that requires a specific psychological makeup, one that Jack happens to fulfill again and again. This idea strips Jack of uniqueness while simultaneously making his fate more tragic. He does not become evil through a single failure or weakness. He is caught in a system that continually reproduces the same kind of man. The photograph reinforces this by freezing Jack in a moment of social harmony, surrounded by people, smiling confidently, finally included. This is the version of himself he always wanted to be, admired, central, and unchallenged. Yet the image is also deeply ironic, because it immortalizes him not as an artist or a father, but as a symbol of conformity to the hotel's violent history. Reincarnation, in this sense, is not spiritual growth but spiritual stagnation. Jack's soul does not evolve, it repeats. The Overlook as a machine that recycles violence. Seen through the lens of reincarnation, the Overlook becomes less a haunted house and more a mechanism that recycles certain psychological types. It draws in people who are already predisposed to control, resentment, and repression, and then locks them into its history. The ghosts are not memories of the dead so much as echoes of past iterations of the same patterns. Jack's presence in the 1921 photograph suggests that the hotel feeds on these repetitions, preserving them as tradition rather than resolving them. This interpretation also reframes the film's American historical subtext. The photograph's date, July 4th, ties Jack's absorption into the hotel directly to American identity and celebration. Violence, exclusion, and domination are not anomalies in this history, they are foundational. Jack's reincarnation symbolizes how unresolved national and cultural violence persists by reappearing in new forms, carried forward by people who believe they are starting fresh, but are unknowingly reenacting the past. Eternal entrapment rather than closure. The true horror of the final image lies in its denial of closure. Jack does not escape, repent, or even fully perish. He is fixed in place, smiling forever in a moment that never ends. Reincarnation here is not rebirth but imprisonment. There is no suggestion that the cycle will break, only that it will continue with new faces and the same underlying structure. The Overlook does not need Jack to remember his past life consciously. It only needs him to behave the same way again. In this sense, the photograph is not just a revelation but a warning. It suggests that people who refuse to confront their own capacity for harm do not disappear when they die. They become part of a larger pattern that outlives them. Jack Torrance's final transformation is not into a ghost but into history itself, unchanging, unexamined, and eternally repeating. Jack Torrance remains one of cinema's most haunting characters because he feels disturbingly plausible. He is not defined by spectacle but by familiar flaws, pride, bitterness, denial, and the desire to be owed something by the world. The Shining does not ask the audience to fear Jack because he is different, but because he is recognizable. His descent suggests that horror does not always arrive from the outside. Sometimes it grows quietly from what we refuse to confront within ourselves, waiting only for isolation and permission to take over.